Shannon Shorr recently went over the 2 million mark in gross winnings from his live and online tournament exploits. That is an impressive feat for any player, of course, but it didn't come without its hardships. Shorr experienced a decline after his initial success and began to have misgivings about being a professional in poker. His recent results, however, have revitalized his spirit and gotten him back in the game. Shorr did well in the recent 5-star World Poker Classic at Bellagio, making 3 final tables in the series. Shortly before that, at the tail end of 2007, he had a successful run in the 5-diamond World Poker Classic at Bellagio, cashing 3 times, including the main event and making 1 final table. We have Shannon in the studio today to talk about his recent success, about getting back on the horse after feeling down and out, and about his plans for this summer. All right, so thank you very much for doing this interview with us today, Shannon.
Thanks, Shawn. Glad to be here.
So you've been having a really successful run lately. You did really well in the 5-star World Poker Classic at Bellagio. You made 3 final tables. What was the deal with that tournament series? What were you doing well that got you to those final tables?
I think the biggest thing, I was playing with a bunch of confidence, which success breeds success, I think, in tournaments, and just found myself in good spots, didn't run too bad, which is, huge in poker tournament. You can't get sucked out on all the time if you want to win tournaments, and kind of avoided the marginal spots and was patient. I think that was the key.
Well, what was breeding that confidence? Was it all within that series, or were you having like a lot of luck before that was just really kind of rolling the ball in the right direction?
I've been doing pretty good online in tournaments and cash games leading up to it, so that makes life a lot easier when you don't feel so pressured. You don't have to win. I think it's easier to do well that way.
And how does confidence really affect your game, though? Like, what changes do you see happening in your game when you're truly confident?
I don't know. I think the decision, you're just not second guessing all your decisions like you are if you're running bad. You're kind of playing like not to bust as opposed when you're confident. You see the plays happening like before they even get there.
Okay, so you aren't as worried so much about busting as making the right action at the right time, even if you're wrong. You aren't worried about being wrong necessarily.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, and what are your biggest problems still in live tournaments at the moment?
I think if I had to pinpoint one thing right now in live tournaments, it'd be my early game and the big main events where you have a bunch of chips. I think I'm playing too passively instead of trying to really accumulate and put myself in a position to win. That's something I've been analyzing in my game. Like I'm not getting big enough stacks early like I used to, I think, in the big tournaments.
Okay, well, when you say passively, though, can you kind of give us an example of what exactly that means for you?
Sure. It's not so much like missing value, because that's something I pride myself on. I'm always going to get the most value out of hands, but I think I'm just like, I'm playing a lot of pots for pot control, because I don't want to like get crippled early. And instead, I think I should just trust my gut and play it like I'd play a full ring cash game.
Okay. And you said that you used to be really good at getting big stacks early, but you hear a lot of people saying that you can't win the tournament early, and you also hear a lot of people saying that whoever is the big stack on day one usually isn't going to go on to win the tournament. It's just kind of like a urban myth or whatever. So is that really the right way to play, to try to accumulate as many chips as early as possible, or should you really be biding your time?
Right. I definitely don't think it's like tried to play crazy. I mean, it's not like you have to get to 10 times the starting stack or be out. I mean, that's not the key. But it's nice. You get to that 200, 400 level, 300, 600 level, and you can push people around a little bit and kind of get in a nice position for when it comes to the all-in game later on.
And as far as pushing people around, in what kind of situations are you trying to push them around?
Just applying pressure mainly. Even when we're deep enough, maybe we're like 40 or 50 big blind deep and we can play flops and stuff. Just putting people to the test, I think, is the key in tournaments. And do you always have to do that in position, or is it getting more and more acceptable and easy to do it from out of position? I used to be a big advocate of like only playing in position, but now I've been playing a lot of cash games lately. I'm really starting to trust myself out of position too, so... obviously, position. You'd like to be in position as much as possible, but I don't mind. I'll play a pot. I'm not going to play against great players out of position if I can, but I don't mind playing against the bad players out of position.
Okay. And I've actually been having this discussion with a lot of people lately where, to a certain extent, playing from out of position can really be a benefit because you're the first person to act. You're the first person to be the aggressor, if you so wish, or you can, lay a trap with a check raise even with air and kind of really scare people out of a pot even with decent to marginal holdings. So just how much of a benefit can playing out of position actually be as opposed to being just a hindrance?
Yeah, like you said, you can still put a lot of pressure out of position. It's hard, even a guy has top pair, a guy's got ace 10 on like ace 9-4. It's hard for him to hear a lot of, to handle a lot of noise if you check raise him and fire the turn. It's hard. That's the best way to put pressure. I mean, a lot of times I'm check raising with nothing and then maybe firing the turn. It's hard for a guy to handle that kind of noise, even with top pair.
Right. Well, as far as the leak that you see being too passive, how are you going to go about trying to rectify that and change it? Like, what steps are you taking?
I'm just, that's mainly something in the main events. I think I'm doing fine in the smaller events with that, because in those, you just got to kind of be patient because you're so short to begin with anyway. But in the main events, I'm just going to, trust my gut, and if I think, I think I should make a big call or make a big laydown. Well, that's what I'm doing. I might be folding too much, but I'm just going to trust myself and play it like I'd play a full ring cash game, and not be so worried about pot control and busting out.
Okay. Well, in your blog on cardplayer.com, you mentioned that two problems that you've been having recently are tilting and a lack of focus in certain areas. And so let's go ahead and start with tilting. I wanted to touch on both those areas. As far as tilting is concerned, how do you go about knowing when you're actually on tilt when you're playing? Because it seems like it's a really hard thing to do. Or you usually realize that you're tilting after the fact more than when you're actually tilting. And for some people, it's actually a problem of just simply admitting that they're tilting, because they know they're tilting, but they just don't want to admit they're tilting.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely easier to see in hindsight, I think. After the fact, you can tell. You never would have made that play if you were like in the right mindset. Yeah, part of it's just you can feel it a little bit. You can feel when you made a bad call just because you're on tilt and you're chasing a little bit. But yeah, it's just admitting it and realizing you need to end that session or get your head back in the right state. Right.
Well, but do you have any tricks for telling yourself that if you even kind of think you're on tilt, to just leave? Do you have any ways of kind of combating the problem and increasing your willpower to leave the game when you know you're supposed to?
Usually nowadays I just kind of feel it. Sometimes I don't, and that's when I have the really bad sessions. But I just feel it, and I auto end the session, kind of.
Right. Well, one component of tilting is knowing when to leave, really, and it seems like people are kind of getting some conflicting messages as far as that's concerned. On the one hand, they're told that if they think they're better than the people that they're playing at the table, they should always be staying. But on the other hand, you're told that if you're losing, you should leave, and if you're winning, you should stay. And so I would argue that most people, like probably 90% of people, a disproportionate amount of people, think that they're better than whoever they're playing against. So they should always be staying at the table that they're at in their own minds, even if they're losing, because they know they can win it back. So really, how do you reconcile that conflict?
Well, like you said, there's definitely no shortage of guys who definitely think they're always better than the next guy in poker. But I don't know. You just have to, part of like game selection stuff is, sometimes you have to admit, like, this guy may be outplaying you. You might be in the, he might be leveling you and really getting in your head. And part of it's just, you got to know that sometimes. It's not always. There's very few guys in the world that you're going to get enough action from that you should always be playing them. So part of game selection is playing them when you're in the right mindset and when you think you've got an edge on them.
Okay, well, and as far as that's concerned, obviously ego in that respect is a big problem for players because they think they're better than the other players, so they may stick around when they aren't supposed to or when they aren't better. But on the other hand, like you just mentioned earlier, confidence is a big factor. If you're confident, you should be confident and you'll be playing better. So if you're confident, that means you kind of have an ego and you think you're playing better. I mean, they seem kind of opposed to each other, aren't they?
Okay, yeah, confidence is huge. Like we said earlier, you always need to be playing with a bunch of confidence, but part of confidence is being confident in knowing if you belong in that game, I think. So you can't let your ego get in the way, and like I said, there's times when you shouldn't be in games, and I think you just have to realize that. Okay, good point. Well, as far as tournaments go, it seems like tilting is a really big problem in tournaments, especially when you're playing a bunch of online tournaments at the same time because, and I read this in one of your blogs, you start tilting on one, carries over to another, and it could just ruin your entire session as opposed to playing live where you tilt and you're at just that one tournament. So how do you deal with that? Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, 'cause I definitely am affected by that sometimes. Like, on Sundays, you'll have 5 nice sweats going on. All of a sudden, you get bad beated in one, make a bad shove in another, and then all of a sudden you're down to like 1 tournament. So, yeah, that's tough, and you just have to, focus. That's kind of a different animal. Like you said, you don't deal with live, but you just have to adjust from tournament to tournament online, and then live, you can't tilt at all, really. One mistake in a live tournament, and then that's it. So, yeah, they're kind of 2 different animals.
Well, so how do you deal with it, though? I mean, how do you separate the tournaments from each other mentally?
I just try to if I bust from one, I just try to refocus and tell myself I've still got this many tournaments left. I don't play too many online tournaments these days, but when I do, I try just try to take everyone individually and focus on each one.
Okay. And as far as focus is concerned, that was the other topic I wanted to hit from your most recent blog. You say that you really have a lot of trouble when you're playing online poker. You're playing poker, but you're also like browsing the internet, or you're watching TV because you're on your laptop, or what have you. You're doing a lot of different things as well as playing poker, which you even admit isn't necessarily the most professional thing to do for a professional poker player. Right. So how do you go about eliminating that kind of thing? Do you have any tips, or what are you trying to do to make sure that you stay focused and just play the poker?
I think it's hard this time of year with so much going on. There's so many sports and stuff. That's basically what I've been doing. I'll sweat, baseball or basketball games and read about them on the internet and all that. But you just have to, like you said, be professional and do what it takes. Get an office or something, or sit at a desk and just get in that zone. I think is the best way to go about it. Obviously, there's only a handful of guys, that are able to do that and focus on just playing poker and stay in the zone for a session. And I'm currently not one of them. I hope to be one day, and those are, that's what sets apart probably the world-class players from the, great players.
Well, you seem to have a love-hate relationship with poker. I mean, you had this tremendous run to get yourself started, and then in the middle period, you kind of had a little bit of a decline. I mean, you were still cashing a decent amount, but you kind of, it seemed from your blogs and from some of your writing that you were kind of starting to think again about your life path at that point. And now you've started having success again, and you're really confident, you're back on the horse. So how did you get through those rough patches, and how did you kind of turn it around and make sure that you're still in the game?
Right. Yeah, it was pretty well documented in my blog. I had a bad 07. Not terrible, but bad. I kind of turned it around at the end. But I just, it was a real trying time for me. Just, live, I was playing mostly live poker, and, 1 year playing live tournaments is such a short term. I mean, I played maybe, 40 or 50 tournaments that year. And, you could easily run bad over that period of time. And it just hurt, it was on a big level when you're playing all the 10Ks and busting and things are going bad. And I kind of let it affect me, and I really was angry at the game. Although, I shouldn't have been, and I feel bad about. There was one blog where I kind of got a bunch of heat for saying how I hated poker and stuff, which isn't the case at all. I'm happy about what poker's provided me and stuff. It'd be foolish to say that I hate the game. But I was able to kind of examine my game, and I've been reading, studying, and stuff, and finally just convinced myself I wasn't just getting unlucky. There were things I needed to work on. I think that was the key. It kind of turned my game around. So
what kind of books were you reading, and how were you studying?
Not so much books, but just reading the online poker forums and talking with friends and stuff, and talking hands. That was something I never really did before. I was just there to play poker. I didn't like talking about poker on the side, but I think that really helped.
And in what ways? Like, did you have any kind of epiphanies, or did your game change dramatically in certain ways?
I think right after the laws that kind of changed online poker, that the game's evolved a ton since then. No Limit Hold'em's a totally different game, and now it's more. In 2006, I could sit play a live tournament. I was one of the only kids under 23, playing the tournament. Now it's all online players, playing live. So it's a totally different game, and I think I'm doing a better job of playing the online game and playing my stack size instead of just trying to run everybody over.
Okay. Well, and now let's get to the World Series, because obviously that's coming up in just a few days, and I'm sure you have some big plans for that. What are you planning on doing for that series?
It's going to be a really busy 2 months for me. I plan on playing just about every no limit hold'em event that runs. That'll be over 100,000 in buy-in, so it should be should play pretty big. I'll probably play some limit hold'em too. That's a game I'd like to play a little better, but I still think I have an edge against the guys that play that at the World Series. So basically, just about any hold'em event that runs, and that's about it, I guess.
You aren't thinking about branching out into any of the other variants?
Maybe I'll play like a cheap Omaha 8 or better tournament, but I'm trying to,
Stick
like I
to
said,
what
be
you know.
as professional as I can and game select as well as I can.
Well, so how do you prepare for attempting to take down so many tournaments, attempting to even play in so many tournaments?
It's going to be a long summer for sure. I've been getting into fitness lately to try to get physically and mentally in the right state, which I think is huge for this. And I've been trying to eat well because the past couple summers I just kind of drank a ton and eat pizza every day and all that and gained a bunch of weight. And I don't want to do that again because it makes for a long summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to get myself in the mindset and try to come to play every day and do my best.
And for something as physically taxing as a live poker tournament, and especially if you're going to be playing like 2.5 months worth of it or 2 months worth of it, it could really affect your game negatively to not be even in the right physical state to play in them. So
yeah, no doubt about it. I'd heard people talk about it before, and I was like, it's not a big deal. I can go sit there for hours and hours and hours, but I think it really helps. I feel much better when I'm, at least in some sort of shape.
Well, and you actually have an interesting prop bet that you've proposed as well for the World Series. You're proposing a roommates versus roommates prop bet. First off, who are going to be your roommates for this World Series, and what are the details of the prop bet?
Okay. The roommates that I believe will be playing are Cody Slayball, who's Thug Moneymaker, and Mike Katz, who's Bonzo9876 online, Eric Basebaldy Baldwin, Adam C. Sim Sucks Geyer, and myself. We haven't really worked out the terms of the bet, but hopefully we can get something for maybe like $10,000 a piece, and it'll be a nice sweat, and it'll bring a lot of camaraderie as roommates, and we can go root each other on and stuff. I think it'll be fun.
Well, I mean, is it basically going to be a point system or a total money won, or how are you going to do it?
That's all like
Still
in the
up in the air.
negotiations. Yeah, we'll have to figure out what we think's best, and make sure nobody's got an edge. The most important thing in prop bets is the negotiations beforehand. So it'll be interesting. I'll be glad when we get it set up.
Have you had any bites yet? Have you had any houses that you think are going to be willing to do the prop bet with you guys?
I have actually. I got an email the day after from Thomas Fuller, who's Good Night Moon online, and him and Chris Moore, who I believe won the Wynn Classic.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of lead that team, and 2 other guys that I don't know well, but I think we might be able to work it out with them.
Well, and if you don't know the 2 other guys well, it's probably a decent prop bet in your favor. At least you're hoping.
Well, I'm sure if they're putting up 10,000, that they're great players, and if they're friends with those 2 guys, they definitely are. So
Okay.
it'll be interesting.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. I really appreciate you doing this interview with us.
Thanks, Shawn. Enjoyed it.
And thank you guys for watching the Online Zone on Card Player TV.